Well, welcome to ParaMOOC 2023. The official name of the course is Parapsychology Research and Education, and this year's topic is apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists. We started the live sessions on the 28th of February, and they will end on April 1st, and you never know what will happen between now and next year. The first thing I'd like to do is say thank you to my organizational team, Brian Williams from Psychical Research Foundation and Natasha Chisdis from Chisfilm. And I would also like to thank with all my heart Lizette Coley and Anastasia Demalis, the president and executive director of the Parapsychology Foundation. PF has supported our course since 2015, and we're very grateful for that. Today we'll be having Christopher Laursen from the University of Guelph in Ontario and Susan Demeter from Paranormal Studies and Intuition in Italy. And the title of our talk today is Making Sense of Ourselves in Studies of Ghostly Phenomena. Today is March 22nd. Christopher is a social and cultural historian and transdisciplinary researcher. He studies how people experience and try to explain extraordinary things that can't be easily rationalized. Christopher is best known for his historical studies of the poltergeist phenomena. His ongoing research considers encounters with non-humans and the natural world, physical anomalies, dreams, precognition, and after-death communications as personally and culturally transformative experiences. His website is christopherlaursen.com. Susan is a Canadian writer, artist, and paranormal investigator. She is the author of Cosmic Witch, founder of Paranormal Studies and Intuition, and a co-creator of the Ufology Tarot. Susan has conducted scholarly research on behalf of the Defense Studies Department of the Canadian Armed Forces College in Toronto on the topic of UFOs, and for the Chrysler Parapsychology Unit at the University of Edinburgh for EuroSci. The themes of her writing, research, art, and spirituality incorporate her lifelong interest in exceptional human experiences, social history, mysteries, and cosmic magic. You can find Susan at susandemeter.com. From James Joyce's Ulysses, every life is in many days, day after day. We walk through ourselves, meeting robbers, ghosts, giants, old men, young men, wives, widows, brothers in love, but always meeting ourselves. How does one's personal journey inflect their research on ghostly phenomena, in which thinking on the phenomena makes better sense of oneself? Susan and Christopher found their research paths on ghostly experiences intersect in ways that inform not only their research directions, but their lives. In this informal conversation, Susan and Christopher reflect on how they met and started out in their work and where it led them in their research interests, practices, and worldviews. How have art, journaling, tarot, dreams, and other forms of divination enhance their toolkit to study ghostly phenomena? What interconnections have resonated in understanding ghosts as part of a larger ecology of culture and experience? In this, Susan and Christopher's journeys, including shared adventures, speak to how lived experiences inform research and better understand themselves in the process. They show how researchers benefit from reflexivity-building self-awareness into their studies of ghosts, hauntings, and poltergeists. And now I'm going to get out of your way, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nan, and thank you for everyone who's joined us today, some familiar faces, and thank you to Susan as well for joining. Susan and I have been friends for a long time now. I think it's been what? It's almost 20 years for sure. We're getting close to 20 years. So, you know, today we're really getting into how we met and how those adventures have shaped us as people and as researchers focusing on ghosts and hauntings. So I really love the quote Susan chose from James Joyce's Ulysses for our get together, because yeah, we do meet all sorts of interesting beings along the way in our life journey, but always meeting ourselves. And I think that was a great jump off point for this conversation that we wanted to have together. And I think that, you know, the big question that we're thinking about here is, how does one's personal journey inflect our research on ghostly phenomena, in which thinking on the phenomena itself has actually helped us make better sense of ourselves. So this is really what we want to think about. How has looking into the phenomenon, the ghostly phenomenon, helped us make better sense of ourselves? So I want to turn it to you, Susan, first. I want you to share, like, where did your personal journey with ghostly phenomena begin?
Okay, well, before I answer that, I also want to extend my thanks to everybody for coming and letting us speak, and especially Nan and Brian. Thank you so much. Geez, well, where to begin? I began having experiences with apparitions directly as a child. These experiences at the time I framed as ghosts because that was my cultural upbringing, and through pop culture, and that's what I understood this to be. And at times these experiences were very traumatic, and they were not something that I could deal with very well as a child. So later on, as I became a young woman and I started to become interested in psychology, and that I tried to use that as a means of exploring what happened to me as a child. And while that did have some sense, I continued to have these experiences as an adult. And that's, I guess, what led me into what would be considered traditional ghost hunting, or being part of a ghost hunting group, and then eventually forming, co-founding the paranormal studies. And initially it was Investigation Psi Canada, where we were collecting reports from across Canada and actively going out and investigating reports of ghosts and poltergeists in the field. Much like they do, we kind of patterned ourselves after the Society of Psychical Research and also ASAP in the UK. Kind of that boots on the ground, going and taking in reports and investigating these claims, and then creating a database online for that. So that's basically where my root was, though, is in these childhood experiences that I couldn't explain. Although my family was open to these experiences, I knew, I guess, in some ways that they were a taboo. So it's not something I could discuss really openly with family members. These weren't experiences that I could go to my schoolmates and say, hey, I have this being sitting at the side of my bed and I know I'm wide awake and I can't make sense of this. So I guess for me, that and then hearing some of my family's stories, like my mother had an NDE that she openly talked about. Other like relatives in the extended family had ghostly experiences and hauntings and that. So all of these things kind of worked towards my ideas of you know, that there's something more to this reality than what we as society deem acceptable, even if it's not something that we, you know, most of us anyways feel very comfortable talking about. I mean, that's changed for me. I'm very open now, but not when I was much younger and a child. So that's my kind of origin story with ghosts and hauntings, is literally rooted in my own experiences. So yeah. I hope that made sense.
Oh, it does.
It's kind of funny talking about myself.
It is kind of bizarre. And I was thinking about that before we got started. And in fact, when you're just mentioning, you know, there's a sense that you couldn't speak openly about these types of experiences. There's a stigma. It's so strange. It's actually the paradox of the paranormal. So many people are so fascinated about the paranormal, no matter where they stand on this sort of spectrum of belief or disbelief. Like, people are deeply fascinated by the paranormal. And yet there's also a stigma in sharing your experiences. It's a very strange paradox. And even like, I'm becoming well versed in speaking on this topic, but today is a little more personal. And I found myself again kind of thinking beforehand, do I really want to share personal stories? Like, it still is something for me that I question, but I'm diving in.
Okay, well, and it's going to be a deep dive too.
Yeah.
So how about you, Christopher? Where did your personal journey with ghosts and hauntings and poltergeists begin? Really?
Yeah, very much similar to you, Susan. It really began at a young age. Certainly culturally, there is an interest. You know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s when my rural Alberta school library was actually packed full of books that were about parapsychology, because there was this boom at the time in parapsychology, and there were a lot of publishers producing popular books on the topic. So my introduction to ghosts and hauntings was through books that talked about the investigations of the Society for Psychical Research and of the parapsychology lab, and people like William Roll, the poltergeist investigator, about whom I ended up writing my PhD dissertation in history. So, but there were also experiences, and really my personal journey began with strange dreams. I would have these, I just have a very wonderful dream world. And I mean, it's such a great thing when you can wake up and actually recall your dreams, or, you know, there's this sort of rich other world. But there was a sense that some of these dreams were a bit more than your typical entertainment dreams. And eventually I learned from family members that some dreams were more meaningful than others. And some of those dreams could even predict events to come. Some of those dreams could involve visits from people who had passed away. And that resonated deeply for me. I learned of that at a young age. And so right away I could identify that sometimes there were dreams with special qualities, and I would really pay attention to those dreams. And they actually shaped in a great way how I just had all these questions that I felt were worth answering. Eventually, as a scholar, you know, it all starts with conversations. You know, you start to find your circle of people, and that's very much how Susan and I met. Just bumping into each other because I knew there was this group in Toronto doing these investigations, and their methodology seemed pretty cool. It seemed relatable to what I liked about the Society for Psychical Research. So Susan and I met literally through PsycAn giving a public tour of a haunted lighthouse on Toronto Island. So, you know, finding your group, finding people you can speak with is a huge step forward in coming to terms with your own experiences. In my own family, finding that there's sort of a stream of common experiences around dreams opened a door for me. So for me, it was really a combination of culture, because there was this thriving sort of popular publishing industry and shows like In Search Of. I think many of us remember that show. And also metaphysical kinds of movies. I mean, I found Close Encounters of the Third Kind to be a little more than just a movie about aliens visiting from another world, or movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey just seemed to kind of tap into something else that resonated with my dream world, right? There's just this sense that there's a very, very strange thing that we all have called consciousness, and we have a lot of trouble understanding it. And sometimes it best expresses itself through things like dreams, or through artistic means, through filmmaking, through painting, and so forth. So really, I would say understanding ghosts and hauntings through my life has been braided together with experiences that weren't like seeing an apparition, in a haunted house, but more these dream worlds in which I would get visits from people who had passed, and very meaningful messages would come through in those dreams. So very different experiences than apparitions and poltergeists, but I find all of these types of phenomena raise questions about what happens to human consciousness after death. And also, what is it that we're sensing when we have these parapsychological events occur in our lives? So yeah, thinking on my own experiences, and also thinking of other people's experiences has been a really big part of how I've approached studying and teaching, not only on this topic, this very niche topic of paranormal phenomena, but on the nature of things in general. Like, just how do we understand the nature of things, of ourselves, of the world around us, whether it be physical, whether it be human or non-human. So that's been driving me and my work for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Susan, I want to turn to you with another question if you're ready.
Sure. I was just reflecting as well while you were
Yeah,
talking,
let's hear
how
it.
our journeys have really been, in many ways, they've paralleled each other in such a beautiful way. But yeah, I'm ready for another question.
Wonderful.
Sure.
Wonderful. And it seems like we're rolling really well here. And I just can't wait to see what thoughts everyone here might have to share after we've had our conversation. So, I mean, as I mentioned, I met Susan through a public tour of the lighthouse, and we became good friends through other tours and investigations, and through this community of people who had a common interest in understanding ghosts and hauntings, but also psychan and what's followed have always looked very broadly at all kinds of phenomena. So, I mean, UAP or UFO phenomena are a big part of Susan's interests. So, you know, to me, I think a question to pose to you, Susan, is research into ghosts and hauntings could both be grounded and rational, but also fun and mysterious. And that's something I've always found in our adventures together. Like, yeah, you know, we can look at these really weird things, but we can keep our feet on the ground and have fun while we're doing it. Like, we have a lot of laughter when we're together thinking of these deep topics. So I'm curious, how did your experiences with psychan help you grow as a person? What did you learn from those experiences?
Well, they certainly evolved. And I mean, prior to psychan, I began investigating this haunted road in Ontario, not far from where you are now, that had a history of hauntings. And it was also like what I would consider a teenage drinking spot, where people would go up and they would, you know, wait to see a ghost, and there was folklore and everything that was attached to it. And I had found out about this location through a friend of mine. It was back in the 90s. And of course, you know, my interest was piqued, and we decided one day, well, let's go drive up to this road and see if we can see what's going on up there. And sure enough, we had some strange experiences that first time going up. And it kind of morphed into us going up once or twice a month and then trying to resolve this mystery. And this was like in the kind of the beginning stages of where you see the internet flourishing and you see these groups starting to come up online. So there was community. And when we'd go up to the road, I'd talk to people up there. There was all sorts of people, not just teens trying to escape their parents and have a fun Saturday night or whatever. There was all sorts of people that were going up there trying to see experience this mystery. And I realized early on the value of kind of taking these experiences and preserving them, like at least even just as a historical context that would be adding to this lore of this road. These people were experiencing things, or they weren't, or they had different ideas. So from that came the very first website, which was dedicated solely to this location. And I was shocked how many people started writing about the ghost road and what they knew. And some people were convinced it was a hoax, or it was only a hoax, or it was natural, or whatever. And then other people were, very much sharing their paranormal experiences with me. And I would put them online, and we would continue going up to the road. And I'll never forget one incident where I was on the road and I was trying to photograph these spook lights that occur up there with a camera and a telescope that was duct taped. So I wasn't a professional investigator. I was just, a young mom looking to solve a mystery. And I had the car pulled up, and there was an older gentleman, and he said, "Oh, good luck." But he said, "I know what you're trying to do here." And he said to me, "Please don't take our ghost away." And at the time, this didn't make sense to me. I was, I'm solving a mystery here. And it wasn't until a few years later that it really struck me, don't take our ghost away, what he meant by that. So that was the beginning forays into the investigative part. We did eventually resolve the spook lights as car headlights, which was exciting, but a bit of a letdown at the same time. But it didn't explain everything that was going on there. And we certainly saw our fair number of hoaxes, because this was over 2 years that we were traveling up to this road. But after that, people continued to write to us from different locations all across North America and even Europe. So it started to morph away from this road, because the main storyline had been kind of resolved for us. And, there was only so much we could do continuously going up to the same location. So from there, we put together the idea of PsyCan, which was Paranormal Studies and Investigation Canada. And we kind of, again, we patterned ourselves after the SPR, we patterned ourselves after ASAP, and we wanted to provide a place where people could, like a safe space where people could share. And at the same time, if we were going to investigate, we were going to do that with a very high ethical standard. I started actually my investigations, my boots on the ground, by reading Lloyd Auerbach. And I still recommend his handbook for people that I don't know. I was in the 80s. It came out. It was my first ghost hunting book, and I still stick by that. And from there, it evolved. Eventually we changed the name to Paranormal Studies and Inquiry. Now the website and it's basically it's a website now, and it's left up as a database which people can use to research different cases across Canada. We don't do investigative work anymore, but the website is still there. And now it's more of a social media hub. I have a private group on Facebook with about 4,000 strong that is now Paranormal Studies and Intuition, incorporating more of the psychic processes that can go into investigating these things, as well as taking a more right-brained approach to the investigation, where in the beginning it was more like, if I could go back to Susan of 20 years ago and say, I'd be incorporating my witchcraft into into my investigations. I've got no, we have to be really scientific. It has to be, but now it's like, no, it's more of a completely holistic approach that encompasses all viewpoints. I really take to heart the Dr. Jeff Kripal's Making the Cut. So that's basically where that whole journey of PsyCan and investigation took me. It took me from a place of wanting to just solve the mystery to going through this journey to understanding that the journey perhaps is more important than resolving a mystery. The people I've met and the wonder that it has inspired, and the thirst for knowledge and consciousness and art and all these various things that have come with that wonder. And that wonder is why I believe that gentleman said to me, please don't take our ghost away, because
Mhm.
these mysteries do help us to form community with each other. And they can be a lot of fun, and they can spur that wonder and that desire and that thirst to learn more, and, you know, without need of ever resolving any of these things. I've learned so much, far more than I needed to, without trying to resolve whether a place was haunted or there was really a ghost there or not. It's not
Yeah.
an issue anymore.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think this is a big part of our message today, is expanding, the way we understand the world around us, applying more holistic methodologies in the work that we do, and how we speak together as a community of people who have had these experiences and we're interested in them. So yeah, wonderful thoughts. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah. And now we had a lot of adventures ourselves in
Yeah.
and can you tell me a little bit about how PsyCan, like, it impacted you, like,
Mhm.
our shared adventuring, and because we did do ghost hunting together, which was a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did that impact you? How did that shape your
Yeah,
view on ghosts and hauntings? And
I guess if I were to sum it up, there were some experiences that simply broke how I was thinking. Like having something occur. I honestly connected with PsyCan because I was preparing for a scholarly career, looking at this topic. And to be a scholar in this topic, one has to really try to wear the objective hat. And I've, going deeper, studying the history of science and so forth, you can really challenge this term objectivity. You can never erase subjectivity from how we experience the world and how the world works. It's just there. So there have been some moments that have broke how I thought about things when I was hanging out with everyone in PsyCan. There was a private establishment, for example. It was actually the first time I went on a ghost investigation. And I remember the folks who were at this private establishment talked about shadowy figures, which was interesting, and objects moving. So of course that really appealed to my sense of interest, because I was very intrigued by poltergeist type activities. But I went in there. I had a digital recorder on a notepad, which I never recommend, by the way. Don't put your digital recorder on a notepad, because you just hear yourself writing notes most of the time. So, I was absolutely green, as a complete amateur going into this, but I wanted to just be the observer, the neutral observer, absolute, like, skeptical about some things, especially like electronic voice phenomena. Like I honestly just didn't know what to think of that. I worked in radio broadcasting for many years, and I know that anomalies can show up in recordings. But I wasn't quite sure what to think of this idea of EVPs, of electronic voice phenomena. So I was just literally recording to get a transcription, to create a transcription of what people were saying, and to start to think about how do people interact in a ghost investigation. That was my role. I was there to be the guy who was interested in how things work. That's all it was. But that broke on 2 points during that investigation. The place had been investigated before. So, the methodology, Susan, that you and your team had used was really, let's go in, interview people, find out what's going on. And at that point, you had connected with 2 people who were mediums, and they were both really interested in the work PsyCan was doing. And you thought it was an opportunity to see what the mediums would say about this location. And I just happened to be there. I'd never gone to an investigation before, certainly not one involving mediums. And I was really intrigued to see how these 2 mediums worked. They went around separately, giving impressions. So the first breakage occurred really with one of the mediums sitting in a chair, and there's only one other investigator in the room with me who's filming. And she was literally just sitting in the chair recounting her impressions. And as she was doing that, I felt this incredible chill around my lower legs, and it was very noticeable. And literally, the medium whose eyes were closed, they snapped wide open, and she's looking directly at my lower legs. And I mean, she said the funniest thing. She said, "Is there someone playing with your pants?"
Remember that.
I mean, and I'm trying to be Mr. Objective. I'm trying to be that scholar in training who's here to observe. And I said, "I feel something." That's all I could say. I didn't want to feed any sort of information. And I mean, the way she perceived things was that there was a ghost or a spirit who was of a child who was kind of circling around my legs and then kind of shyly hiding behind me. And that was, just that sensory experience, like feeling something and then having this interpretation of what was going on. Because she wouldn't know with her eyes closed that I was getting a chill, or like that's a very private sensory experience. So something occurred there, because I'd had some physical strangeness occur in prior to that, but in the context of a ghost investigation where I really didn't expect anything, God, it was fascinating. The other fascinating thing that occurred was when I went home to listen to the recordings, and I was just listening. And Susan, you were actually in conversation with the other medium who was attending that investigation and just asking questions. And I was listening, and I was literally typing along to make a transcript. And Susan, you asked a question, and there was this moment of space before the medium answered. And I'm listening on my big headphones at my desktop computer, and I could just hear this absolutely otherworldly, whispery male voice. And I couldn't make out a word. And I literally am getting goosebumps just recalling this moment. And then the medium answers, and there's the sound of what I could only describe as a child or children kind of making shrieking noises after, which was nothing that anyone had heard. And one of the investigators there many years later at a presentation, he loves EVPs, and he held that EVP up as the best example that he'd heard. So to me, that broke how I thought, because I really was quite skeptical about EVPs. I'd worked in radio for many years. I know how radio signals can bleed into microphone cords, for example, things like that. So, but this sort of quality of that whispery voice is almost like it was at a different level than the other audio. It was very strange, and it wasn't the case that somebody was muttering something, and this certainly was not the case that there were children shrieking in the room at that moment. So I love those moments where things broke, where my expectations were tested, and I was like, it just cracked my mind open a bit more. And I still can't explain either of those events. I don't proclaim to explain either of them, but they really started a very active process of, okay, there's much more to the world than we can fathom, which has become my mission statement in the work I do. So, I mean, that's just one example. For me, what do I take away from that? It's really that experience is always at the center of all this phenomena. It takes a person to experience the phenomena, and without that, we don't have the phenomena to report. And that really goes for how humans experience the world in general. I think that there's something that paranormal experiences point out to us. It's that everything is directly experienced by us, and we report back on that. And there are things that just don't fit into the normal experience. And we need to actually just put experience a little more back into the center of how we think about the world around us, and that, no one else in that room experienced a chill, for example. It was just me, or no other recording device picked up on those strange noises. Mine did. So the experience centeredness, but also that approach that I took into that investigation was important. That's sort of what Jeffrey Kripal and others have called methodological agnosticism, where you're not professing to have an answer or even be looking for a specific answer, but rather you want to understand like what's going on here. And you create, for example, a list of the phenomenology, like what did I feel? What did we hear in a recording? And I mean, kind of stripping away the explanatory frameworks and just saying, this is what is experienced or documented. Let's start from scratch and rethink that, because so often culture influences our interpretations right off the bat. So that's been a big takeaway from the moments psychan investigations broke how I thought about things.
Yeah, I think the phenomena has a way of doing that with us, is that when we have these experiences, no matter what lens we kind of look at them through, it changes us. It opens up that wonderment, again, to understand that perhaps our knowledge of reality is incomplete. And that there's something more going on, because so many of us do have these experiences, or we know somebody that we love and that we trust that has had a strange experience, and that it's not so easily, explained away. But I mean, like I said before, for me, and I think you're kind of at the same point, does it really matter if it's explained, or does it matter more how it impacts the people that are experiencing these things?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And yeah, I feel like that we should just kind of put the spotlight a little more on the ways that these events affect people and our culture. I think those are very important ingredients in addition to the types of work parapsychologists do. It's all important. If you put more ingredients into the mix, you understand things more clearly, even if you still at best can only say, I don't know. And that's one of the things I always got from you, Susan. Right from the start, you're always like, it's okay to say, I don't know.
And it can be, but like the whole process and the process of ghost hunting and community, and even like these online groups where you can openly discuss your experiences without fear of ridicule, it's healing. Like I can't tell, like, I mean, I had very strange experiences as a child, and as I said, they were not easy to live through. And I'm going to spare those details, but you can imagine. But through the ghost hunting, through these types of experiences of research and forming community and being able to talk to different people, even people who are skeptics. I joined in the early 2000s, I joined a Skeptics Canada. I was just trying to explore everything and different ideas. And through that, there is healing. There is healing, even if I don't have an answer to what created such trauma as a child. It's all important. It's all important.
Yeah, it is. It is. I agree. Yeah. Susan, did you want, I'm kind of keeping one eye on the time, but also want to make sure I honor what we're kind of talking about bringing into our conversation. Did you want to talk about the Philip experiment a bit, or do you think we should zoom it? Like, I'm just kind of thinking maybe there's one last thing.
We might have to zoom through it, because like the Philip experiment, which I'm pretty sure most of the people that are going to be, listening in are going to be familiar with A.R.G. Owen and the really profound experiments of the 70s in Toronto. I just basically wanted to say how they really, finding that book by Iris Owen really impacted my view on how going away from dead people or the spirits of our beloved dead to maybe something more. And the ideas behind it being that these people really got their results when community was formed, when people were really starting to gel as a group in a creative and fun and joking way, which is something we always did in our psychan days. Is we would laugh and giggle, and not at people or at
Mhm.
the experience or the phenomena, but we were having a good time with each other, and there was always jokes that were cracked, and we didn't, I think, take ourselves all that seriously, even if we took everything else very seriously.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
it's part of that positive, cultivating a positive social community around these really fringy topics.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, just for the benefit of anyone who might not know the Philip experiment, it's basically a five-year long experiment that was conducted in the 1970s in Toronto by New Horizons, who's led by George Owen and his wife Iris Owen. And they wanted to put the idea of ghosts to the test, to see actually if they could invent a ghostly type figure. They actually envisioned originally an apparition forming, sort of like this idea that who was it? It was David Miel, Alexander David Miel, who wrote about tulpas in Buddhist culture. This idea that a person, a Buddhist adept, could actually manifest an apparitional form who looked very realistic through the powers of mind. So they were interested in creating an apparition, had absolutely no luck doing that. But what they did have luck in doing was just like what Susan said. Basically, if we kind of lighten it up as spiritualists did in the 19th century around a seance table, laugh, sing, and so forth, maybe Philip, who was their totally imagined character, they'd written a whole story about this character named Philip, an aristocrat from, I think, the 16th century, who had a terribly tragic life. They invented a complete story. They drew a picture of this fictitious character, Philip, and they wanted to manifest him. And the way he responded was much more in the tradition of spiritualism, and also somewhat like the poltergeist, in that there were rappings on the table. There are these knocking noises that emanated from the table around which they were sitting together. And they would just stick with the very simple yes, no answer type dialogue with Philip. So that's a little bit of that. But yeah, absolutely. I was also deeply influenced by the Philip experiment. I think really thanks to you, Susan. I picked up Conjuring Up Philip, which at the time, I mean, it was such a rare book. It was just even a wonder to go onto Amazon and find a copy for $30, because a lot of the copies were over $100 at the time. It was a rare book. But it's the kind of book, I'm not sure if it's been reprinted in recent years. I haven't checked. I don't think it has, but it is one of those books.
It has, yeah, because
Yeah.
I've written about it recently in Jack Hunter's book, Deep Weird. My
Right.
chapter in there,
Yeah.
Philip, he figures in there quite a bit, and people have asked me about the Philip experiments, and I've looked, and it's very difficult to find the book. I wish someone would get it out there again, because there's a huge interest in this. It's super interesting. And I found mine for $4 in a thrift store.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And when and it wasn't until years later when I was, oh my goodness, it's very rare.
Absolutely.
It was meant to be.
Yeah. And I did see Nan's comment in the chat that we don't have to worry as much about time. I eventually do, because it is my work day, but I'm keeping that in mind and are expanding a bit on the Philip experiment. But yeah, there's definitely a methodology that the Owens brought forth that sort of became lost after the experiments were done, but somehow they were revived. I think that in large part, what for me connected as a follow-up to the Philip experiment was the Skoll experiment in England, where again, they're applying these very open-minded methodologies. And I mean, certainly we could open the floor here, and I'm sure everyone here would have their own takes on the Philip experiment and on the Skoll experiment. But the simple fact that there is this methodology that suggested the imagination has a role to play in this phenomena that we're experiencing, and we shouldn't ignore that. There's something to be said about the imagination, about people actually putting some faith into what they're experiencing in order to kind of draw it out. So there's this role that human consciousness plays in the phenomenon. It's almost like there is an interaction, you could say, between whatever that is, the something else that we experience, and then ourselves. So for me, that was a big part of the growth in moving me forward. So from Susan introducing me to conjuring up Philip, and really thinking on that as I was thinking on the poltergeist and what kind of work were people doing to push the boundaries of how we understood this physical phenomenon known as the poltergeist. And I found like the Philip experiment was one of those key studies that we can't ignore, but because it both drew from parapsychological interpretations, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis that were really huge, that grew out of the work at the parapsychology lab in the 60s and 70s. But the imagination factor, I think when you start to get creative, Susan, it kind of throws a wrench for a lot of people, doesn't it?
Yeah. But that's the thing. I think that as I've kind of gone from just, we have to do it very scientifically to incorporating more of these creative techniques, and certainly exploring occultism where the imaginal does play a huge role, that there is something more there that as far as the imaginal and the imagination that engages. And I do believe that there's some studies that suggest that people that are more creative are more likely to have these types of strange experiences, at least more often. So I think there is something there, and it deserves to be explored. There's something that within ourselves is playing a role as well. If there is something outwardly that's creating these phenomena, it's also engaging with us on some much deeper level and within our inner world, like which
Absolutely.
is where the dreams come from, and
Absolutely.
wherever
And
psi is coming from.
Absolutely, I agree. And the thing is that when you are a person who's creative, when you're a person who puts intuition maybe in the driver's seat of your life, you know this already, right? There's this, it's called the knowing. A lot of people say the knowing to describe, it's just there. But the role of parapsychology has been so important historically, like Nan was saying, there's studies that show this to be true. So, there's always this, like, even though Susan and I are sort of raising up these processes where we've tuned into the intuitive and creative sides, where we've listened to dreams and paid attention to experiences and so forth, there's always historically this important role of researchers exploring that through different ways to show evidence or to support what people are experiencing. Yeah. I guess the one thing I just wanted to note, kind of the takeaway from what we've just spoken about, is I start to think about these types of experiences or these types of experiments as part of a larger ecology that help us understand culture and consciousness, as Dr. Jeffrey Kreikel has talked about in his work. And ghostly phenomena are part of that. They just are part of the human experience and part of the natural world. So I would say, again, like just being open to the methodologies, to something like what the Philip experiment did, and certainly being critical about that and seeing where you can improve. Those are great things to do. Any other final thoughts on that? Because I know you certainly have been very inspired by the Philip experiment over the years in your work, Susan.
My final thoughts is I would love to see more people pursuing this type of hands-on direct experimentation. It's something I have been doing and is the focus of, I've discussed it a little bit in the Deep Weird in Jack Hunter's book, but it's going to be the focus of another book that I'm working on, with experiments I have done trying to replicate Philip and doing it in different ways, such as incorporating a UFO as opposed to a ghost and giving it a narrative, and using creative writing and different techniques, art, to create an outward paranormal experience. So I would like I said, I'd love to see that book get back into print so more people can discover the brilliant work of the Owens that was so inspiring to me. And I'd like to see more people doing these types of experiments. You know, I think that
for
is
Susan,
important.
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
a
I think for
hands-on kind
Susan,
of girl.
you are. I think we
Yeah.
both like that. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think maybe there's another layer to why the Owens do mean a lot to Susan and I, and that is because they did their work in Toronto, and Canada just isn't exactly known as a hotbed of, you know, prior to the internet, really, it's not known as a hotbed of research. So there's sort of, they're kind of parental figures to us in
Yeah.
research
Yeah,
as
I think so.
Canadians.
And the whole the Toronto Society for Psychical Research, they did a lot of fascinating things, and yeah, I think that's part of it too, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Hometown pride.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, I know that we just have a few more things we wanted to talk about. I'm curious as to what folks watching right now might have to bring into the conversation, but how would you say your approach to investigation has evolved since the Psychan years when we were first hanging out? Because you certainly have had quite a journey since then. We both have, you know, we've gone all over the place. We've inspired each other a lot along the way. So what are some of the key things that stand out for you in how you've evolved?
Well, again, in the beginning years, I was more very like that kind of science-based approach. I was more worried about being taken in by hoaxes or where my boggle threshold was. And now it's like I've completely adopted Dr. Kreipel's Making the Cut, which is basically I don't have to necessarily subscribe a causation on anything, but I do take it all in. Like I'm an all-in person now. So I've removed that boggle threshold for myself. And I think that's freed me up as well. Using different things, divination, tarot. I have my little, here, I'll show it to you.
Yeah, please do.
My ghosts and spirits tarot. There you go. So I might incorporate that. I might do a reading, you know, or pull a card. I incorporate astrology, art. One of the things that's really struck me when we were at the Vinegar Factory is how one of the mediums brought a sketch pad and colored pencils, and she was sketching away, and she sketched out a piece of history that was unknown to us. And you have to remember, this is going back to the early days. This was before Google. So it wouldn't have been very easy for her to have found out this very specific piece of history of a flood and some other things that went on in that place. It impressed me. And then I started bringing a sketch pad as well, and really not even saying anything to anyone, but just starting to doodle things, impressions that I was getting. And I was so surprised at how accurate some of this stuff was. So that has allowed me to kind of take my spiritual practice into my research. And at least on a personal level, I have found it quite fulfilling and interesting and leading to even more questions and more, you know, research. So that and this is something that I wouldn't have been even comfortable, even in the beginning when I started to do these things, like bringing in tarot, bringing in art, using my psychic processes. You know, I wasn't that comfortable telling other people I was doing these things because I figured, oh, there you go. I've lost all credibility now. And my thinking on that is 100% reverse, 180% reverse now. So
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. Gosh, I guess we're running out of time now, aren't we? Should we talk about our takeaways from this conversation?
No, Nan is just affirming, no, you're not, you have time. So
Yeah, but
Whatever you
I
want to
know that
say.
you're on your lunch right now.
No, I'm good. I'm good to go for another half hour here, so we can open the floor for some conversation as well. Yeah.
Ha comprado uno para hacer ese dedo flojo.
I think we just need to mute our iPhone friend.
Okay.
But yeah, let's continue as planned.
Okay. All right. So where are we at now? We were talking about takeaways.
Yeah. I think that
own,
I was. Yeah, we're talking about sort of how your approach evolved to where you're at now. I guess I could touch on that as well. Thinking about how my approach has evolved. Yeah. For me, I would say I've learned a lot about how important it is to honor both that intellectual, rational side of thinking alongside the intuitive, creative side of thinking. I think both of them are really great. I mean, there are those there. I mean, you can take a test on the internet. Are you more of a right brain thinker or more of a left brain thinker? And yes, I have done those tests, and I always come up where my intuition side is a little bit stronger, which I always say puts it in the driver's seat. And my intellectual side's like the really vocal passenger with the map. So for, kind of understanding the way I think in relation to why I like to approach this topic the way I do has been a very big part of evolving as a researcher and as a person, and not only in thinking about the paranormal, but just everything. We're just constantly barraged with all sorts of information and things we need to figure out, and that approach for me has been really beneficial. So I think, Susan, you may have brought the term open-minded skeptic to me at some point, or at least one of my colleagues in the world of psychical research and parapsychology.
I mean,
it's one we've talked about. Yeah, it's probably you. And I think that's a great way to sort of sum that up, being open-minded, but also skeptical, as in you ask questions. And that's where the methodological agnosticism has been useful. It's not that I have a predetermined answer to any of these questions, but yeah, you're right, Susan. More and more questions are always generated through this kind of work. So yeah, I just feel that, yes, being an open-minded skeptic, but also tuning into my dreams, because dreams are a powerful part of who I am, to my heart, to my intuition. So being myself, I've actually found being myself, and I find this with you too, Susan, you've always, and more so, put yourself into how you consider these topics. And it's a wondrous thing, actually, to just own who you are when you're looking at the strange things that we look at in this field. So to me, there's this balance that I've always kind of worked at between the power of our brain, the intuitive side, and then that's something else that we don't quite understand that we're investigating. And you were mentioning wonder earlier. I do think like wonder and awe are chief components of this kind of work. Like, to me, I feel it's quite wondrous experiences I've had. And when I hear other people's experiences, like there are times where I'm just like, wow, it just takes me aback. And I think that wonder and awe are healthy components for humanity in general. I think we need to show some humility to how amazing things are, that we don't understand everything out there. And this is the door that this word, the paranormal, brings to us. It allows us to open a door to wonder. And yeah, looking at the world through a lens of wondrous mystery kind of enlivens things, doesn't it? It makes me think that yeah, there's a lot to be curious about. You don't have to be an old curmudgeon as soon as you turn a certain age and close your mind. You can actually stay open, be curious. It's okay to be naive. We're all learning as we go. But that kind of curiosity opens up possibilities, I would say. And we have to just keep on being curious. I think that's the big thing that I've grown to come to along the way. Yeah, definitely.
I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, we promised ourselves we would kind of wrap things up. We don't, I've learned, another thing I've learned over the years is when you write an abstract, You should always honor what you've written in your abstract and give people your takeaways so that they can think about the bigger points you're trying to convey. So what about you, Susan? What kind of big takeaways from our conversation do you want to just reflect on before we go to the floor and open it up for a conversation with everyone?
Yeah, well, on a personal level, my pursuit of these subjects has really helped in my own personal growth, not only just in my spirituality, but I mean, in friendship and knowledge. I mean, many of these investigations led me to learning about histories that otherwise I would have never explored. Learning how to create websites and form social communities online. These are all skill sets and things that I can look back on and say are benefits from exploring ghosts and hauntings. And as well, like just the ability to create that kind of safe space where people can share their paranormal beliefs also had a healing effect on me personally. But I mean, again, and in a greater way, I just sip of tea because I've been talking. Sorry about that. Just in a greater sense, again, that idea of community, that the subject, which is shared so much across the board, in every culture and every era, you seem to have the ghosts and the hauntings. The wonderment, it forms community and it gives us a drive to consider more. Maybe that's the point of all these things. That's kind of where I'm at now. I have to wonder, is that what these things are about, these mysteries? They don't really need an explanation so much as how do they impact the individual? How do they impact society as a whole, and drive that wonderment? Yeah, I mean, that's my takeaway from this. And I hope it's been interesting. I hope that you know, our talk here has been of interest to people and maybe created more questions and self-reflection on how this has positively benefited people.
Absolutely, I agree. For me, I thought about three takeaways, and one is fear of the unknown is unproductive. You know, I know that I know sometimes weird stuff can be scary. Absolutely. And Susan talked about trauma. I've experienced things that were very unnerving, and I actually kind of put it out there. I don't want that to happen again. Weird stuff can be scary, absolutely, but it's unproductive to just fear it. It's absolutely unproductive. It's not going to get you anywhere. And I know that there's this fear-based sort of culture around the paranormal. All sorts of paranormal movies are fear-based, and that's the predominant approach in popular culture to these experiences. But I think we need to reassess what scares us. We need to question why we're scared. What are the cultural and social reasons that we're being scared by something? And that goes for freaking everything, doesn't it, Susan? It's just sort of like, there's a lot of fear circulating out there, and people seem to forget the beauty of community, of friendship, of just having a conversation about how you feel. So I think that what we need to do is we need to take some of these tools that are coming out. Like I highly recommend Ethan Kross's book, Chatter, for example. We all have a chatterbox, right? That tells us things that sometimes go in circles and sometimes make the fear stronger about things. And one of the key things out of that book by Ethan Kross called Chatter is this idea of distancing yourself from the chatterbox and kind of observing it from the outside and starting to ask questions just like, well, what happened? You know, starting to break it down a little bit. You know, determining, is there a present threat? You know, if you're experiencing something that's paranormal, like seriously, are you in danger in that moment? Or is this thing past? And if it's recurrent, is it a threat? And when it's harmless, well, or when it's not occurring, you know, if it was something scary, if you've awoken from sleep paralysis, for example, you awaken from that. Yeah, that happened. Let's think about what happened and let's try and work to understanding it better. Something like sleep paralysis, there's tons of very interesting literature about it. Sleep paralysis is absolutely a scary thing when people experience that. When I've taught courses on the paranormal in university settings, my students most often come up to me and tell me about the sleep paralysis experience. That's the most common thing they've told me they've experienced. So yeah, I just want, when we fear something, when there's something that's scary, we need to just reassess that and think about why it's scary and maybe break it down a bit and make it less scary, because we have the ability to do that with anything, right? The other thing that I think is a big takeaway from my time together with Susan is how wonder and curiosity bring us to the heart of the mystery. But they also, wonder and curiosity also brings us closer to our own hearts. You know, I only find that wonder and curiosity just lift me up, and it gets my eyes wide open. And it gets me wanting to explore and understand things. And when I don't know, but wow, that was wondrous, right? So I just think we need to be attentive to wonder and curiosity. And related to that, I really think wonder can be applied practically in everyday life. And I just know you have something to say about that, Susan. Wonder can be applied practically in everyday life to braid together the interconnectedness of all things. Because when you start to look at one object, your object of study, you're going to find it is just entangled in all sorts of other things. We cannot just isolate a certain type of phenomenon and expect it to act the way it did in the natural world. You know, you can't isolate something and pop it into a lab and expect it to act in the same way. We need to apply a lot of different tools to understand that thing and how it's interconnected to a lot of other things. But wonder is absolutely central. To show humility and respect to those things that occur, that we experience. There's this idea, oh my goodness, I'm trying to pull a name for my brain, it's not quite there. Oh, I watched a talk with her in ASAP last year. Oh, her name escapes me, I'll try and look it up, but she talks about like really honoring that, for example, ghosts may be sentient beings and we should treat them as such. And I think that's fascinating.
Of course.
So wonder can be applied in everyday life. Absolutely. Yeah. Susan, did you have some further, like when I said wonder can be applied practically, it just was like, well, that's what Susan does.
Well, that's the focus of my life. And honestly, yes, wonder is important. It's also important to know that we do have agency as well over ourselves and what we do want to pursue and what we don't. And, you know, there are downsides as well, but I'm trying to focus more on the positive when it comes to, you know, this type of research and ghost hunting in general. I don't really do too much ghost hunting anymore. But I live in Italy now, and honestly, there's a lot of really interesting places that I would like to go ghost hunting in, and we'll see. But it is important to bring wonder. I mean, I do. That's part of my spiritual practice, and I think that I can also owe that a little bit to the experiences I had that led me to this research and the ghost hunting and the Psycan days and all that, and circling around to the idea that, yeah, a lot of this was about community and getting to know people and not feeling alone. A lot of people have these experiences, but it's very difficult to discuss them, you know, and so it's important to have those safe spaces to do so, because it can be very healing. And beneficial.
I agree.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and fun. We had fun.
That's just have
Visuals,
fun with it, everyone.
like sitting up in the middle of the night in a spooky space. Fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, I would love to open it up to those folks who are here with us today and hear any questions that may have arisen in the chat or that anyone has, or any comments. So, Nan, I'll pass the mic back to you.
Yeah, I haven't looked at chat.
Yeah, you could go all the way back up. There's a bunch of different things. I'm trying to find everybody has been very interested with all of this. And Glued, and Tom Ruffles has turned into our link maker.
Thanks, Tom.
Brian had to go in, his grandmother is ailing and she needed to be taken to a doctor's appointment, so he had to leave a little while ago. When you were talking about your teeny tiny town with all the books, I really resonated to that, because when I grew up in Woodstock is now 26,000 people, but when I grew up, there were 3,000 people. And the library was so small. I mean, now if you look at the library, it's like one little corner of it is what we had when I was a kid. And they were full of parapsychology books. Somebody in the 1950s bought everything, like from 50 to 61. So it was really a good way in. The other thing I wanted to say was we had a Puerto Rican, I think she's still here. No, I think she's left again. She is a ghost hunter from Puerto Rico and had gone to on a hunt to Kansas, and was talking about a photograph that she got. So that was kind of wonderful. A haunted mansion in Two Rivers, Nashville, Tennessee, and got a picture of a woman ghost. Then we were putting everything in we could find. Tom Ruffles was on the Philip experiment. Carlos and I met Iris and George, and I don't know when or where. It was a really, long time ago. And I don't remember, but I remember that we were just charmed by both of them. And also by that video that had the wedding ring stuck in the middle of the table. And the idea of coming up with a guy named Philip from the 17th century. My first thought, which I immediately hid at the time because I was going to be a scientist, was, there's got to be a lot of Philips from the 17th century who nobody cares about anymore because they're just haunting somewhere or the other. And maybe you just knew about this guy and incorporated the guy and didn't realize that you made him up. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So now I know that I know absolutely nothing about Jeff Craigfull's book. So we're going to get all of those into the description as well. I'm trying to see, and I think everybody was really kind of happy. Allison said something about that the chatter thing you were talking about sounded like the monkey mind in Buddhism. Oh, Tom. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks
I
for
really
joining.
appreciated
Thank
it.
you for joining, Tom.
Yeah.
Oh, he's gone. Whew.
He's been around. Mind. Yeah, yes, he just took off. I also resonate, and you guys, anybody wants to open up your your videos and your audio, that's okay. What was I going to say? The other thing I resonated to was, well, everything basically, but when you said that that it was like the left brain was sitting in the passenger seat reading the map, and the driver was trying not to be that visible. I felt like that a lot over time, because I've had a few experiences, but never, like one-off of like a lot of things. But I always felt like, no, the driver is quiet. So let's not talk about that. Brian brought up a talk that I gave in a conference that was held in the virtual world Second Life. And I roped in Dick Bierman, Dean Radin, and Julia Mossbridge, who all spoke in this installation over like a month. And it was something that Linden Labs had supported for the artist that built the location. And I talked about time slips. And what was interesting about it was Brian mentioned it yesterday when we were having the presentation yesterday, and I went and I looked at it again, and I forgot that I thought that recently was when I started, that I got old and my brain was getting like smaller and all that stuff. And now I'm worried about who's inside that ghost and I don't want them to be in pain. And, I thought that was a new thing. But actually, I mentioned that in that talk in 2016. And I think I'm hearing it more and more and more. And even Tom was saying that in the chat. It really is ghost hunting is really an unfortunate description for what folks are doing, and I think that Beth Hebfa is going to come with some of that too. But this whole notion that we just assume automatically there's nothing there, that it's got to be place memory, or there's some kind of person that's in this loop that can't get themselves out of the loop. Not that they're actually in there and know they're in a loop. And I think one of the things that made the Ghost of Mrs. Muir back in the day such a thing for everybody, and makes BBC's Ghosts and CBS's Ghosts, is that these guys are really in there and really trying to find a way to get where they're supposed to be. And anybody who's a ghost hunter, it seems to be, or a so-called scientist, is just coming in there to take the details and say, oh yeah, well, okay, walk from the stairs to the dining room and back again twice. Okay, got it on the, and nobody was thinking about the person inside there. So I'm really glad that you brought that up too. But I must say, I love origin stories. So this was just probably my favorite thing so far. Not to mention, for a while there, you had some afternoon Italian light on your wall, and that was kind of nice.
The sun is starting to set here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite nice. So, but really wonderful, you guys, and I'm glad that you expanded it out and hit off absolutely everything that could possibly be brought up.
Oh,
and
that's
Allison,
great.
I'm shutting up so you can talk.
I'm just raising my hand just because I don't know how to do it in the app.
It's all right.
Hi.
It's all right.
Hi, guys.
Allison.
So I really liked when you were talking about, Christopher, you were talking about these experiences that you had that like broke your thinking. Because, I would really like to be like Susan. I mean, I know it would be traumatic, to like have these second sight abilities on a regular basis. So yeah, I don't know if I could handle that truthfully, but I often wish that I had more of a faculty in that area. But I'm more probably like you, Christopher, in that I'm interested, but then I didn't really know if such things were real or not. I mean, I believed other people when they told me their heartfelt stories, but it's different when it happens to you. And I've just had just a couple of experiences, but it would be disingenuous to explain them away. It's not that I'm not critical. I am critical of the things that happen. And sometimes when, I thought something was something, then, it resolved itself quickly. But there are some things that have happened to me where I'm like, nope, there is no explaining that away and being honest about what happened. But, I had one experience that was curious to me because it broke me in that when I saw it, it was a visual thing. When I saw it, I didn't like tell anyone, even though I was at the location with my brother. I ghost hunt a lot with my brother. We have a business together, we're very much into this. And so I didn't even tell him that I had seen something. This is like big news. And I didn't tell him until this happened on a Saturday, until that Monday, after teaching school, came home and then just said, oh, by the way, I called him, oh, by the way, something happened. And so it was just so, watching your own mind work is a very strange experience sometimes, because, I've always wanted to see these things. And so you would think like I would see something and I'd go running to tell everyone, and I was in a public situation. So
Yep.
that would have been really easy to do. But my reaction was completely different.
Mhm.
Whereas I just didn't talk about it at all and just went on with my business. And I'm glad that somehow I remembered it, because there have been
Mhm.
other things that have, unusual experiences. One in particular I can think of that that was not paranormal, but it was just not in my regular
Mhm.
mode of being. It wasn't the regular
Yeah.
24/7. And so I just I forgot about it for years.
Mhm.
So it's just interesting to me how this happened to me, somebody whose career is based on this. And I see something and then I don't, it still takes me time to process it, to tell anyone about it. And I just wonder, how many other people who aren't into this at all are having incredible experiences every day, but their regular mode of being doesn't really let those extraordinary experiences in.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah,
So
I've,
I
I've
just
contemplated that a lot, especially with the idea that gets floated around sometimes that children are more psychic or more in touch with the other side. And I've always thought that children are more likely to vocalize if they see something strange than with an adult. You stop and you start trying to discount things, or it even becomes almost like a non-event while you're processing it. And it's not until, like you said, days later that you're like, what, wow,
yeah,
Mhm.
and
what
how much
happened
it
there?
was not conscious. It was not like
Mhm.
I was really thinking I can't tell anyone, or that was too weird, or
Oh yeah.
it wasn't conscious. It went below the level of conscious thinking at some
Mhm.
point. I
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get your reaction to that, because
Oh yeah.
it gives me such an uplifting feeling, thinking that there's all this weird stuff going on everywhere, but
Sure.
just don't know about it because nobody's talking about it.
Well, it's again that paradox that we're also fascinated with these types of experiences, but it's so hard for people to talk about them. And I mean, I totally relate, Allison, to what you're saying. It was the same as that investigation that I talked about where I got the chill around my legs. That I remember. I don't know, Susan, if I said anything to you at the location, but afterward, we're all gathered as a group upstairs, just
Yeah, it was
chit-chatting, and I was the
after.
quiet one, kind of like, holy shit, I noticed. I didn't say anything to anybody about that in that group circle where we're talking about the investigation. I said nothing, and I was processing it, and it was later that I definitely would have connected with you, Susan, and told you in some more detail. But that's how it is when you. And I love how you mentioned there was something non-paranormal you experienced, Allison. It was a very similar kind of thing. I mean, anything out of the extraordinary, we have to just honor ourselves in that. Sometimes you just need to sit with that, and that's another thing Jeffrey Kripal brings up in his book Supernatural that he co-wrote with Whitley Strieber. You have to sit with it, and that's okay. Particularly this idea that in a ghost investigation, you have to like jump on it when something's happening. You have to jump on it. There's kind of that mentality, isn't there, Susan? But there's you have to actually honor. There's a whole variety of processes people go through when they experience these kinds of situations, and sitting with it is part of that. And I think more people need to sit with it. To be honest, I think too many people jump to conclusions too quickly.
Yeah. But I think that when a person has that initial experience, it's often people have that. It's shocking. It's shocking for me. And I've had many experiences throughout the course of my life, and it's still shocking when it happens. It's outside of what's normal, and you do question yourself and your perceptions and what was this that happened. And I think that's normal. And yeah, I do think it's important to sit with it and honor it, and take the time you need to process it.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Great
Thank you
presentation.
for sharing. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone
I
else
think
have thoughts?
they're just worrying about seeing the video. If anybody else has anything to say, pop in. I was going to say it's like a creative process that we were not really taking into account. You know, you'd pull off, especially on the scientific side, you pull off whatever you can pretend you're being objective about, because Christopher, you're 100% right. There's no such thing as objectivity anyhow. And it's a ideal and a myth, I think, in science. But it's like as you work on it, you know, it's like the difference between being a well-trained artist who is spending all of their time making themselves leave the creativity apart, you know, trying to do a very really realistic painting that shows exactly what you're seeing, but you're not infusing it with the way you feel about the person or the way the light is or where you think that person should be depicted. And you're just getting this tiny little bit of what the entire experience is. So it's for me, it's a wonderful thing to hear. This has been a transformative course for me, because at first I gave it to, you know, Brian to do it. With Carlos actually thought it up back after the 2020 Paramook, because the folks who something happened to the recording of the poltergeist ghost and haunting talk that Brian had given, which was amazing. And so we said, well, okay, well, then we're going to focus on that the next time, kind of thing. And then I just gave it to Brian, and Brian has so many more hands in the various aspects of everything that's around us, right? He's got this amazing network, and then is very careful and also joyful about what he does. And I literally had no idea. I mean, I know who you were, Susan, because you're on my Facebook page, but you know, it's like at least half of the people that were invited to come, I'd maybe vaguely heard of them or not heard of them at all. And I was constantly saying, well, what's that person into, and so on. So it's been the most wonderful experience for me, not only meeting everybody that with different agendas and different experiences and different ways of looking at things, but also seeing this kind of idea that some folks on the other side are either hiding, or, you know, in the scientific community are either hiding or are trying to get them articulated without getting bitten by, you know, some of the ultra scientific side, that there is so much more to all of these experiences. And it's about damn time we stop talking about we're a science with no, you know, with one of those negative definitions. Well, if it's not everything else, then it must be paranormal. Excuse me, the experiences are under there and have been under there for eons and eons and eons and eons, and they're all those kinds of discussions about them have not changed that much. The phenomena hasn't changed that much. And all the creative and spiritual and religious kind of ideas, cultural ideas that have come out of those experiences, you know, that's something also that needs to be understood and honored as we go along. So I love that this is bubbling up in the Paramook. It's not only teaching me all kinds of things I need to learn, so I'm very happy about that, but it's also getting these kinds of ideas out there and honoring not only the people who have the experiences, but the people who examine the experiences in a different way from the, you know, very narrow sort of scientific point of view. So good on you. So glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here.
Yeah, it's a great honor. It's a lot of fun. You know, I've been going through a big career transformation, so I've put a pause on a lot of things. So this just seemed like a wonderful opportunity when Brian emailed, you and Brian emailed then. And the first thing I thought of was, this has to be a conversation with someone who has helped form who I am as a researcher. So I'm very honored, Susan, that you have been part of this with me.
Thank you. And I feel the same. I'm so happy we're on this journey together. All of us, actually.
Very much
we're
so.
all together on this journey.
Yep.
Yep.
One
Absolutely.
way or the other. Yep. Well, I if anybody has anything to say, we're getting once again to that 90-minute thing. And my thing is, I always don't want to kill our presenters by saying, yeah, we want you for another 3 hours. What else can you say? It's not.
Oh, we
too
probably
nice.
could go on for another 3 hours, given the
yeah.
Well,
time.
that makes me happy, but
Yeah. If I didn't have other meetings demanding my time coming up, I would say yes. But I'm happy. I'm happy I was able to.
You're not the only one. Pam Heath rolled out of one and then rolled back into another one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And folks, so happy that you came. And if you're watching, the ones that had to leave early, we were grateful you were here. I'm going to be a little bit. Oh, that's you making the heart. That's a good idea. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the next one that's coming up. Okay, now we're going to fly past this lady and get to our next event, which is on. Can you see that? I think you can.
Yes.
Okay. So Beth Hedba is going to be talking for us on March 24th. It'll be called Doing Something About It, Clinical Parapsychology. And she has been beating the bushes for people to come to this talk. Oh my goodness. Anyway, her abstract is clinical parapsychologists are less concerned with validating and studying the presence of anomalous events than they are dealing with them. They focus on intervening and resolving the crises those events cause for individuals, groups, and families. She's going to focus on poltergeists. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she's going to be focusing mainly on poltergeists. She describes what that is, and she said, unlike a deceased discarnate spirit being responsible for these perplexing, often upsetting, and sometimes outlandish events, parapsychological field research has shown that poltergeists are frequently traced to the unconscious, the unexpressed, the usually conflictual emotional energy of a group or an individual, and often as a witness, unaware of their role as an unwitting poltergeist agent. So Beth's talk will outline how to blend scientific knowledge with clinical tools and conventional crisis intervention techniques, while also working with psychic energy and intuitive resources to help individuals and families alike confront their fear of the unknown, to find a new and enlightening way to meet these most challenging circumstances. So I think not accidentally, your discussion is really a wonderful preamble for what's coming next. And it's a happy accident, and I'm really glad that you were here to do this for us.
Nan, did you give a time for Friday?
Did I thank you so much, Elizabeth. Oh my goodness. Wait, let me get it back.
Noon Central.
Okay. Yeah. Noon Central, that's it.
Oh, what does it mean, noon central?
Central is Chicago time. Noon.
And
Chicago.
Noon it's 12 o'clock.
Noon. Right. Noon is 12 o'clock. So it's 12 o'clock in the day on the
I can find
24th.
what it means to me. Okay, thank you.
No problem, Elizabeth. No problem. And Paula, my apologies that you just came in, but we're just about closing it up, but we will have the video out, I think, in the next couple of days.
Of course.
So, yeah. Well, thank you again, you guys, and have a wonderful afternoon. And now, you're always going to be on my list, both of you.
Oh, wonderful. I'd love to do it again.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Well, have a wonderful day, you guys, and thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.